Market equilibrium is the point where the curve of demand and the curve of supply intersect on the economics graph. So this is the supply demand chart or graph, better said, and what it includes is these two axes. The horizontal axis is all about quantity. In this case, it will be both about quantity of supply and demand because we will have both curves. I will maybe draw them as lines or almost as lines for it to be realistic, drawable, because if it was not that straight line, it will be quite hard to draw and also move the lines eventually and so on. And then price is the vertical axis. So this is things that you should know before you go into equilibrium. Equilibrium already involves the combination of both the supply and demand curves. So first of all, make sure you know the supply and demand curves. Now, we know the supply curve always goes up. That means with increasing price, the supply quantity rises. Okay, the quantity of supply rises. The quantity of supply. Okay, not supply necessarily. That's the curve itself. So basically, if we were to transform this into the world of mathematics and see it through eyes that you might be more capable of seeing it, because this is quite new and confusing. Just imagine like you still have the same axis, but the change in shifting of the curves when we shift the curves, which is what we did, and this is by the way like a step out of our explanation of the equilibrium thing, is basically when the curves shift, it basically means that the function changes. So you have a certain curve that's a function of quantity and price, right? These two things together, and then when it shifts, that means your function changed. So the function has a new graph, and the new graph is the same shape as the former graph, but is located differently. It's just shifted up or down. Yeah. So that's it. Now let's just complete this. So this is our supply curve, and this gives us the quantity of supply at every point of this line, of this curve, and this is the demand curve. Okay, so again, at every point of this demand curve, it might have been curved, it's quite straight drawn by me now, but it doesn't matter. At every point of this line, you can locate the quantity of demand. Okay, quantity demanded to be exact through this axis, and every point of this line, you can find the price for which it is supplied, and then the price at which it's demanded also for this curve. So whatever point on either of the two curves you find, you can trace back the price and trace back the quantity. Now, where these two, as we've already presented both the S and D in a separated fashion, now we see they actually intersect. And this is the most basic case when they intersect at the very center. Okay, that's nice to show it the first time you see it. Nice to see it like this. Now it's really good to, for example, see some numbers. So let's say 1, 2, 3, and let's say 2, 5, 8. Okay. So at a certain product, for example, a certain product, something that a firm or a company or an individual produces. So like this is more about the entire market. So like a certain product that's being produced at price 5, there is this cross of the two curves, and then goes to quantity 2. Now we could have looked at any other point on the two curves, but what is special about this point is the point where these two curves intersect. And why is it special? Well, it's the point where the quantity supplied and demanded meets. Because whatever other point we see, for example, we look at the S. So for example, for the S, there is this there's this price at for example this point, okay, left of the equilibrium. There's this price for it, it's like, I don't know, 3 or something, and this quantity 1.3 for example. And then when we go right, that's it on the supply curve. And when we go to the demand curve, for the same price, as I said, 2.3, I think, there is this quantity 2.8. So you see, for the same price, we have a lot higher quantity. That means that if we are below this cross, there is much more demanded for the same price than there is supply. Okay, that means when something is sold for a low price, the producer doesn't really want to create it because he doesn't earn that much money from it anyway. And that goes with the law of demand and supply. And also when there's a low price for the same thing, there's high demand. You move along the curve, right? And this is something that we explained in the demand and supply curve introductions before. So this is really important to understand. Now, this is the entire point. As I said, this is the cross and this is the equilibrium. So this is the market equilibrium. This exact point in the middle, where the two, this point, the market equilibrium, where the two curves, the supply and the demand curve, intersect. Okay? Because here, if you look, there's a certain price, which it happens to be, because I set it out that way, is 5 at this place, at this point, and for the same point, there's this quantity. But you see, where the curves meet, there's no difference in the quantity, because when you look at the vertical aspect of this exact point, there's just one option. These two functions, these two curves, have actually the same point, the same value at this very point. That means we can trace back the same only one quantity. Therefore, equilibrium is defined as the place on the graph where the quantity supplied, which is whatever point on this axis, meets the demand quantity, the quantity demanded. So where these two curves meet is where their quantity is the same. The quantity of demand is the same or quantity of supply. Okay? Or quantity supplied is the same as quantity demanded. That's only at this point. You see? And also, there's one more thing that we should point out in this introduction of the equilibrium of the market. There's also something called the price equilibrium. Price equilibrium is basically the price at which there is the equilibrium. So if you go left of the equilibrium, you'll find our price equilibrium is 5. Okay? Now, we will be low, and in this case, of course, there was this law of supply, law of demand tendency, low price, so I don't know, under supply and over demand. And then if we, for example, look at 8, so price at 8, we see oversupply and under demand. Okay? And that all goes with you can stop it and think about it, why it is that way, but just try to give some logics for whatever company you can think of. For you don't even need the exact examples, because this is all methodical. You can draw these conclusions logically from the basis on which the basic economics that you've learned so far is based on. It's all logical. You have to base your conclusions off of reason, and that's exactly what you can do when you take the information that you've been given and you apply it to these charts. And now I've told you the most important things. Just to revise on everything we have to know, so you don't have to feel lost after this video. I'll revise on everything you have to know very quickly. So, this is the supply-demand graph. This axis, here is 0, here is 0, if you didn't know. It rises vertically up and it shows the price. That's the vertical axis. The horizontal axis rises towards the right, so horizontally towards the right, from left to right, and it's about quantity. Okay? Then we have these two curves. They can be curved, they can be straight, doesn't matter. I drew them straight for it to be easy to look on and work with. These two curves, supply and demand, can be drawn independently. You can have a graph just with supply curve and a graph just with demand curve. But they happen to meet at one point, and that point is called the market equilibrium. So where these two curves cross is the market equilibrium. But it's not good to stop just here, to just remember where the two cross, there's the equilibrium, and that's it, and then devote all your time to basically getting the info out of the graphical chart. It's really good to stop here and think about it more deeply. Why is it that way? Well, it's all about the fact that if you go to some price and you draw a straight line right here, you look under price, price below the equilibrium, so price lower than the natural market price, will give you under supply and over demand. Okay, people who buy want to buy more because they see it as a low price, and then people who supply, they want to supply because they don't earn that as much because the price is too low, the price that you're selling it for. And then if you look at the same price for supply and demand, which is above the equilibrium, above the market natural state, then you see there's actual under demand and oversupply because suppliers are like, yeah, great, big prices, we're going to supply more, and the demand is low because people who are buying, they're like, why should we buy for such high prices? We don't want as much. So that's it. And then you see it all comes down to this equilibrium, and there's occurrences in economics, all tendencies and principles all around that. Why usually these states tend to lean or go in the direction of the equilibrium anyway. So when the market is here, it will naturally move towards the equilibrium because that's just the most logical and natural way the market works. Okay. Of course, last thing, what's very important is the idea of and the logic of why the curves cross. It's because their quantity is the same. Yeah, it's all about this horizontal axis right now. So it's why their quantity is the same. And then you can trace back the price of the equilibrium as well, and that's the equilibrium price.